of our focus for today
Mhm.
is the notion of archetypes. And I want to get into what that means. And specifically, you've developed a corporate persona archetype test,
Yes, I have.
which I've taken, and we'll kind of get into the meat of that. And so, kind of figuring out, what kind of roles you play in a professional or work context.
Yes.
So, I think maybe a good place to start for people who may not be familiar is, what is an archetype?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And so archetypes, the ideal of archetypes really grew and developed into psychology and looking at philosophy even through Carl Jung. And archetypes are universal. So some people I think we sometimes confuse stereotypes with archetypes,
Right.
right? Because there is
Right.
some stereotyping that happens with an archetype.
Yeah.
But if you think of sort of universal archetypes like the parent archetype, for example,
Mhm.
whether you actually have a child or not, all of us can tap into that parent energy, or the hero, for example, that hero archetype of what that looks like. And so these are universal experiences that any human can express, or I sometimes call it universal energy that anybody can tap into or access. And we see them throughout, history and mythology and stories and all of that. These archetypes get brought up for us to learn from.
Yeah, and they're as far as kind of Carl Jung, who sort of came up with this idea of archetypes. They're part of the collective unconscious. They're these kind of universal structures within our psyche, and they're helpful because they can allow us to maybe bring out certain aspects of our being in different ways at different times. So it's not like you just have one
Correct.
that you relate with, but maybe at a certain point, it's the parent, as you mentioned. At another point, it's the lover, the leader. There's so many different ways that these can express themselves.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
what happens often is early in our development, very young in our development, our ego as it's developing, which is a very important part of who we are. And our ego develops to help us survive. And it will sometimes attach itself
Yeah.
to a particular persona or
Yes.
so that you maybe always show up as the parent. You're always taking care of other people's needs and not your own. And
Right.
so the ideal in working with like universal archetypes is to be able to open yourself up to the fact that as a human, you have access to any of those archetypes. And sometimes through conditioning or through survival needs, trauma, various things that happen, we get very attached into specific personas. And then that's,
Right.
all we express.
And then so maybe from an early age, somebody told us, oh, well, you're so ... whatever it might be. Oh, you're so sweet and kind, or, oh, you're such a good athlete, or you're such a good this or that, or maybe sometimes negative as well. And we internalize that.
Yes.
And we kind of take it on as our identity, when in fact there's, such a broad palette to who each of us are.
It's a combination of what we take on and then also what we're actively pushing away.
Yes,
And
what we're
so,
resisting.
exactly. And that gets
Yeah.
into kind of the shadow space
Yeah.
of, you might not even be aware of certain behaviors that you exhibit or certain things that you push away. And a lot of this comes back to sort of these archetype expressions.